Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, well, welcome to the webinar on managing disaster differently, shock-sensitive social protection in Malawi. This webinar draws on information which was compiled in a recent report undertaken by the Overseas Development Institute and the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Centre and commissioned by the Government of Malawi with financial support from GIZ through the German contribution to the European Union Social Protection System Initiative, also in cooperation with the World Food Programme and the World Bank. It also draws from recent progress and innovations in shock-sensitive social protection in Malawi. Contributions to this webinar are from myself, Selvi Khan, Team Leader of Social Protection Programme GIZ Malawi, Rebecca Holmes, Senior Research Fellow, Social Protection and Social Policy Programme, the Overseas Development Institute, Harry Mwamlima, Director of Poverty Reduction and Social Protection Division, Ministry of Finance, Economic Planning and Development, Malawi, Edward Archibald, Chief of Social Policy, UNICEF Malawi, Daniela Coelho, Policy and Programme Officer, Food Programme, Quiva Debara, Country Director, Concern Worldwide. I would like to introduce the webinar by stating that shock-sensitive social protection has increasingly gained momentum in Malawi. In the last few years, and especially in response to the devastating effects of El Niño, actors in Malawi have increasingly sought ways to strengthen social protection to contribute to humanitarian response. It has become a national priority and is reflected in key documents such as the current Malawi Growth and Development Strategy, Malawi National Social Support Programme, and National Resilience Strategy. Operationally, many organisations in Malawi are trialling and testing the flexibility and adaptability of social protection programmes to prepare for, respond to, and support recovery from crisis. Initiatives include vertical expansion of the National Social Cash Transfer Programme, horizontal expansion of development programs to integrate emergency affected populations, and designing adaptive programs to reduce the impact of shocks on households. In order to gather the lessons learned thus far and investigate key ways in which the social protection system in Malawi could reduce the effect of or respond to large-scale shocks, a report was commissioned by the government. The report presents features of program design and implementation that could increase efficiency and effectiveness of response, and offers a vision for the way forward, including stronger collaboration between social protection and humanitarian actors. The webinar is organised as follows. Rebecca Holmes from ODI will provide a brief introduction to the study and elaborate on key messages. This will be followed by challenges and opportunities of integrating shock sensitivity into existing social protection policy and programs by Director Harry Mwamlima of the Malawi Government. We will then move to program innovations by UNICEF, WFP, and Concern Worldwide in contributing to building a shock-sensitive system in Malawi, as presented by Edward Archibald from UNICEF, Daniela Coelho from WFP, and Quiva Debara from Concern Worldwide. Following this, we'll have a question and answer with you, the audience. We therefore invite you to submit your questions to the panelists in the text box as they arise, and we will address them during the Q&A session. With this, I present the first speaker, Rebecca Holmes from ODI, to introduce the study. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you. Great, well, thank you, everybody, and it's exciting to be here to be able to present the study. If we could go to the next slide, please. And the next slide again. So I'm just going to present a brief overview of what the study what the study's aims were, and then talk a little bit about some of the key messages from the study. So first of all, as Selvi has mentioned, this was a study on shock-sensitive social protection, and it was commissioned at the time that there were ongoing discussions about the role of social protection and revising social protection programs in the country. The objectives of the study were really to synthesize existing and current experiences and also knowledge of not only the social protection system as a whole, but more generally, more specifically looking at recent experiences of shock-sensitive social protection. We did this through looking at 4 specific angles, looking at how social protection can address the impacts of climate-related shocks. So we looked at the policy and institutional framework. We looked at social protection program design and implementation features. We looked at social protection systems, focusing on aspects of data and information, of delivery systems and early warning systems as well. And then finally looking at financing arrangements. The output of this study was really to provide as a basis of discussion for key actors in the country to look at what the options or what the vision for a shock-sensitive social protection approach could be in the country. We had a study team involving colleagues from ODI, from the Red Cross Red Climate Centre and the Centre for Social Research in Malawi. And our approach combined desk-based review, online consultation with key stakeholders at the national and also the district levels, and then also workshops and key informant interviews, again at the national and the district level. If you could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So, talking about the key messages from the report, and one of the main things to highlight and to emphasize is the reiteration of understanding poverty and vulnerability in the context of climate-related shocks. And what this study really brought together again was really the importance of understanding both seasonal and extreme climate events. So the context in Malawi is that there's a high level of underlying and acute food insecurity and seasonal patterns of food production and consumption. So there are lean periods every year which result in cyclical crises, often resulting in an emergency response, but it also obstructs longer-term poverty reduction objectives and achievements. So an example of this is looking at the MVAC data, looking at the emergency vulnerability assessment criteria in Malawi, looking at what they deem to be needed for an emergency response. Over the last 10 years, an emergency response has been called every year. In some districts, food insecurity is an annual occurrence, with 15 districts being classified as food insecure for 6 years or more in the last decade. So this seasonal and predictable annual occurrence of food insecurity is compounded by the exposure of risks to extreme climate risks, which result in drought, in floods, for example. And these create exceptional periods of acute need. In 2016, for example, 6.6 million people were in need of emergency food assistance. And so what this highlights again is that the extreme climate shocks interact with seasonality and underlying poverty and vulnerability. So even in years where there is not extreme deviation from normal weather patterns, there is often the need for an emergency response because of underlying poverty and food insecurity. And this combined with extreme climate events increases the scale of assistance needed. Could I have the next slide, please? So what role can social protection play, or what role is social protection playing? So when we carried out this study last year, we looked at what are the strengths and what are the challenges of the current social protection system and approach. Social protection in Malawi aims to enhance the quality of life for those affected by poverty and hunger and improve resilience for those who are vulnerable to risks and shocks. Now, just to briefly highlight the key strengths and weaknesses that we reported in the study. So over the last decade or so, there's been increased investment in social protection, and this is having positive effects on poverty reduction, on aspects of food security and poor households' coping mechanisms. There's also been some attention to the seasonality and the seasonal patterns of consumption and production in programme design. For example, public works programmes and school meals programmes are designed around the lean season, and then the public works programmes, for example, are timed around farming, when farming inputs are needed. And then thirdly, there is emerging and potential and of debates of shock sensitive social protection, including increasing linkages between social protection and emergency actors. And we're going to hear about some of those innovations and programme experiences a bit later in the webinar. But despite the positives and the challenges, we also find that the positives and the strengths, we also find that there are challenges too. So although social protection is having positive effects on poverty reduction, it's not yet achieving these at scale in terms of the need of the poor population. There needs to be increased investment in implementation capacity, for example, and attention to the design of social protection, including the fact that social protection isn't yet really minimizing the negative impact of the exposure to seasonal risks, and really trying to support resilience to poverty and vulnerability, but especially in terms of the predictable annual food gaps that we see. And then third challenge is really to strengthen the linkages between the social protection and emergency response in terms of the actors and the programme experiences. And these are emerging, and there is a lot more potential to exploit these further. If I could have the next slide, please. So what then does a shock sensitive social protection system or approach look like? So with consultation with national and district level officials, with stakeholders, we came together to gather what the perspectives are of what a vision of shock sensitive social protection would look like, or what it would aim to achieve. So here we have a short summarized definition of shock sensitive social protection: reducing poverty and food insecurity, meeting the seasonal needs of the poorest, building resilience to shocks and climate change, supporting early and effective emergency action when needed. And it's important to emphasize that social protection, or this system, would prioritize core social protection objectives, and also ensuring that progress made within the social protection system and programs would be protected from the negative effects of seasonal food insecurity and frequent shocks. But I think it's also important to note that social protection, shock sensitive social protection, can't achieve all of this, and it can't achieve all of it on its own. It would never aim, a system could never fully replace emergency response capacity. But what it could do in terms of having a more effective shock sensitive social protection system would be over time to reduce the need, or reduce the scale of need for year-on-year emergency response. If I could have the next slide, please. So the final couple of slides are about what this social protection system would look like. And in the report, we've got a much longer version of this, but I'm really just going to summarize the 5 key headline messages, and the report has a lot more detail of these. So in terms of what the components will look like, we scaled this down to looking to 5 key headings, and thinking about what could be done in the short term, and then what could be done in the longer term. So in the short term, we had 3 key sort of objectives or components. And the first is to prioritize strengthening the design and delivery of existing social protection programs and of their core objectives, so strengthening social protection to achieve what they're set out to do at their core. The second is to address the predictable food and the annual food gap for poor households through, for example, multi-year and predictable programming that would then help to reduce the scale of the annual emergency response. The third is to strengthen shock-sensitive objectives in social protection programming through a more explicit focus on preparing and planning for shocks and climate events in advance, as well as building household resilience. Next slide, please. And so finally, the final two components for the medium to longer term is to think about investment in the systems, in the capacity to develop scalable and flexible social protection mechanisms, for example, that would be able to increase coverage to additional beneficiaries, for example, and to deal with exceptional periods of climate events, exceptional periods of acute need that might result from more extreme weather events. And then throughout is also to increase continue with the dialogue, coordination, linkages between social protection and humanitarian actors. And so that's a very brief summary from me, and I'm going to hand over to my other colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. I now present Director Harry Mamlima from the Malawi Government to present on processes, challenges and opportunities for shock-sensitive social protection in Malawi. Thanks, Harry. Sorry, we're just having a technical difficulty. I think we'll be sorting it out shortly. Okay, I think while we're waiting for the director to fix the technical issue, we might call on to the next presentation. So I will ask Edward Archibald from UNICEF to present on the vertical expansion of the National Social Cash Transfer Programme.
Okay, thanks, Selvi. Okay, so if we can just go forward a few slides. What I'm going to talk about is the some of the events over the last couple of years, starting in 2015, 2016, in relation to the Social Cash Transfer Program. So in 2015, 2016, there was a lot of evidence, anecdotal evidence, that social cash transfer beneficiaries were being excluded from humanitarian responses. So the social cash transfer program targets the 10% poorest in each district, the 10% who are both ultra poor and labour constrained at the same time. That's the eligibility criteria. So these are extremely vulnerable households, yet what had emerged anecdotally and then what we commissioned some analysis on was to verify whether or not these beneficiaries were being excluded and to try to understand why. So there was some qualitative and quantitative work which showed that, first of all, yes, indeed, they are eligible for humanitarian assistance for the most part, but they're often excluded at the community-based targeting stage. It would appear with such deep poverty in Malawi, that communities want to share the benefits of assistance programs, and that seems to be particularly the case with the humanitarian program. So that was 2015-16. Next slide, please. Let's move to the next slide. Thank you. So on the basis of that evidence from late 2015, with a very significant humanitarian response emerging because of the El Niño drought in 2016-2017. Around the middle of 2016, stakeholders took that evidence and policymakers and decision makers concluded that in light of the very high exclusion of social cash transfer beneficiaries, there would be an attempt to piggyback on the humanitarian system by automatically including all the social cash transfer households in the humanitarian response. So from a caseload perspective, it was about 600,000 beneficiaries of the social cash transfer program, which is obviously a huge number, but it was actually less than 10% of the overall humanitarian caseload, which was about 6.7 million people. What happened was that the funding for those social cash transfer beneficiaries, the humanitarian funding for those social cash transfer beneficiaries, and those who are not on the social cash transfer program, was all channeled through the humanitarian system. So that's why it was piggybacking on the humanitarian system, not using the social protection system in itself. So UNICEF then led a review after that piggybacking trial to see whether or not automatic inclusion and piggybacking was an appropriate thing to do. And what communities said was that they recognised the need of social cash transfer beneficiaries to receive support during the lean season. They understood that and recognised that, but they didn't agree, for the most part, with delivering that assistance through another channel. So when beneficiaries received assistance through two different channels, it was perceived as double dipping. So the mechanism was actually very important. The channel was very important. Next slide, please. Can you just move to the next slide? Maybe I'll start talking to it. Okay, here it comes. So 2017-18, middle of last year, once the review had been completed of the piggybacking trial, government and UNICEF and in partnership with WFP started exploring an alternative option, which was to use one mechanism to provide support to social cash transfer program beneficiaries during the lean season. And that mechanism, that vehicle, was the social cash transfer program itself. So what was then developed was testing the operational feasibility of a vertical expansion of the SCTP. So the aim of the trial because it's underway, is to answer the question, is it feasible for the social cash transfer program to be adapted to deliver timely support in response to crisis and shocks? Working with a number of different stakeholders, Irish Aid is funding the actual cash transfers. DFID has been supporting technical support, and Care Malawi has been contracted and is working with Government of Malawi extension workers at district level to monitor and learn from the trial. The baseline was conducted, and endline will be, and there's on-site monitoring and PDM occurring right now. So, looking ahead, this is UNICEF and WFP collaborating closely together to explore under what conditions and how humanitarian actors could channel assistance directly through the SCTP. So the learnings coming from this work, which is underway at the moment, this trial will inform what happens in future response cycles, and in particular some operational guidance and administrative documentation is being prepared on the basis of what is underway now in one district with several thousand households. Okay, next slide, and my final slide. So So the next slide is trying to summarise what's happened these last few years and where we're going to and some of the key lessons. So as I said, the challenge was that the social protection beneficiaries, the social cash transfer program beneficiaries were being excluded. So we tried one response, which was piggybacking, but it seemed to not be preferred by the community. So the second response, which is underway at the moment, is a vertical expansion. Some other lessons that have been learned, and Rebecca alluded to this as well, getting the basics right, reducing vulnerability of social cash transfer program households to predictable stresses. So some work that is underway at the moment by UNICEF and in partnership with ILO is looking at how the SCTP can be adjusted to account for seasonal variations in prices. So that's some very interesting work which will be completed over the next month or two. And then finally, some other work that is planned for 2018, and all of them build very much on the sort of content that Rebecca was talking about. What investments in the social protection system would make it more shock responsive? So UNICEF and WFP are collaborating on that at country level and at headquarters level, looking at what investments could be made and what the return on those investments are. So we're modelling that right now. Around the middle of the year, a feasibility study will commence of a horizontal expansion of the social cash transfer program and perhaps other programs in the social protection system as well. Looking at what would be required, how feasible is it to potentially take forward in the future. And finally, and very critically, we're also embarking on a formal learning and change management process to ensure and embed government ownership in this scalable social protection agenda in Malawi. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Edward. I'll now hand over to Daniela Cuella from WFP to present on horizontal expansion during emergencies. Thanks, Daniela.
While the slides come on for the presentation, I would just like to briefly outline something regarding the content. The next slide. So others have gone into depth about the shock exposure and vulnerabilities in the country. So I only want to draw attention to what is happening this year. This year, Malawi has been severely affected by dry spells and fall armyworm. Damage has been recorded across 18 districts out of the 28, with estimates indicating that close to 2 million people will face hunger. The hardest hit districts are in the south, which are amongst the poorest and most food insecure. Due to these underlying vulnerabilities, amongst others shown in the slide, shocks will continue to require humanitarian assistance unless chronic issues are addressed. In this context, WFP provides food assistance and is working to do so through national systems, like social protection, to make sure that the changes are long-lasting, helping break the cycle of hunger, as noted in national commitments like the MN. The presentation will show how WFP has leveraged the dual role as a humanitarian and a development partner to support the horizontal expansion and the opportunities this offered for developing a shock-sensitive social protection system, bringing together preparedness, response, recovery, and long-term resilience. So next slide, please. In the context of the largest response to date, the El Niño, where close to 7 million people were reached, or 40% of the population, WFP reached over 5 million beneficiaries. Within this portion of the population, there were able-bodied households with the capacity to engage in productive asset creation. With the objective of improving food security, reducing negative coping strategies, and increasing the generation and protection of assets, WFP conducted a horizontal expansion of its Food Assistance for Assets program across 12 districts in the south and 8 in the central region, reaching over 500,000 beneficiaries. Households participated voluntarily in productive asset creation at a level appropriate to their labor availability. This was referred to CPAC. In a coordinated and collaborative manner, WFP and the International NGO Consortium both delivered MVAC and CPAC, with the INGOs reaching over 700,000 beneficiaries through NVAC and 230,000 of these with CPAC. Next slide, please. There are several noteworthy successes from the horizontal expansion trial. Here are some stemming from the joint assessment done by WFP and the INGOs. Number 1, CPAC was effective in fast-tracking stabilization and recovery because CPAC activities were able to address food access, availability, and diversity issues in the short, medium, and long term. The promotion of backyard gardens at the household level, including the promotion of vegetable varieties and nutritional trainings, are a good example of this. Number 2, the use of effective targeting that help reach those most fitting. Beneficiaries overwhelmingly prefer to participate in CPAC rather than simply receiving the unconditional transfers, and many continue to practice the activities beyond the CPAC period. Number 3, fitting work norms that supported households, not strained them. Beneficiaries appreciated that CPAC did not disturb or detract from livelihood activities. Also, beneficiaries were satisfied with the progress achieved during the short time period. Number 4, all of this was conducive to behavioral change. Beneficiaries gained ownership of the assets developed and confidence in the skills earned. This motivated them to further pursue these activities rather than depend on handouts. All of these successes have been instrumental to making the link to multi-year resilience building initiatives under a shock-sensitive social protection model, which I will demonstrate in the next slide. However, of course, there are some areas for improvement. Number 1, timing of activities. Some noted that trainings ran too short and inputs were procured and received with delays. These are related to issue number 2, planning and adequate due to limited time to prepare across stakeholders. There were many stakeholders across the national levels. This made sharing and collaboration hard to realize. Number 3, greater sensitization. There was a lack of clarity on targeting and conditionality amongst partners, delaying rollout on the ground or causing somewhat disjointed approaches. Number 4, coverage and reach could have been greater. With a 20% cutoff of the MVAC caseload, some were left out but eligible to participate. This was related to resource and capacity constraints. And number 5, lack of a consistent approach or vision for horizontal expansion. Coordination, planning, and reach improvements will require the development of a consistent approach to horizontal expansion. On the last slide, I will touch on what WFP with the government and partners is looking to do to address this. Next slide, please. So in 2017, following the response, over 50% of the CPAC caseload was transitioned to multi-year resilience building, starting off with the FFA. This offered a platform to access integrated and adaptive support through that facilitates graduation from extreme poverty and hunger. In this context, FFA grew to 131,000 households or 700,000 beneficiaries, working at the watershed, community, and households level, building assets, skills, food security, and resilient livelihoods. Leveraging on this, WFP introduced integrated risk management package made out of weather index insurance, savings, and credit, which are slowly phased in to help households withstand the impacts of shocks. In addition, WFP mainstreams climate services or weather forecasts and advisories to support adaptation to climate change and the uptake of the integrated approach. Capitalizing on the productivity gains achieved by the integrated approach, WFP leverages its Purchase for Progress program to provide market access and production assistance. The integrated and adaptive support provide a graduation pathway with the objective of transitioning households away from food assistance, with the mark shift being a stop from food or cash provision based on conditionality towards the development of productive skills and capacities that make households self-reliant. The graduation pathway in turn is secured by linking this to a forecast-based financing system, which allows the programs to scale up together to meet additional needs of households. Lastly, this whole graduation structure and the tools and systems that have been developed will be continued to be tested and develop evidence upon, so that this could be integrated into social protection programs to make these long-term and scalable through the vehicle of the MNSSP. Next slide. Then my last slide. I just want to touch again on the last element of improvement that was noted under CPAC, where it was noted that improvements in coordination, planning, and reach will require the development of a consistent approach or vision that will bring together humanitarian and development actors. So going forward, WFP, working with the government and partners, will be looking to explore targeting as a point of departure. Before I proceed, I just want to verify that the slide is on. The final slide, please. Thank you. So at present, the humanitarian sector and social protection programs do use different targeting methodologies. And in order to be able to work across the humanitarian and development spectrum, it is important to develop a system that is interoperable. And really, that is something that we would be looking towards, since that would help with issues around coordination and how we come together across the spectrum. The key questions that we're going to be asking under this piece of work is, who are we targeting, with what, how to target, and when to target. This, of course, will bring together learnings from the horizontal expansion that you heard about, the vertical expansion also presented by UNICEF, and other learnings and trials that we have been doing to further collaboration across the humanitarian systems. With that, I would like to conclude, and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Daniela. We'll now turn to Quiva DeBarra from Concern Worldwide, who will present on building resilience through adaptive programming. Thanks, Quiva.
Next slide. And the next slide. Next slide, please. So Concern Worldwide is an international NGO that's working here in Malawi, addressing extreme poverty. Our hypothesis is that by using adaptive and iterative approaches to generating knowledge, we can feed into the development of shock-sensitive social protection systems and structures here in Malawi at national level, while delivering immediate benefits to surface. Over the past 2 years, we've been testing some key ideas under the area of shock-sensitive social protection, and have been supported in doing this by Irish Aid, UNICEF, and the European Union, specifically ECHO. Next slide, please. Next slide. So in this slide, if we can continue till the slide is full, we can see that Concern is implementing a graduation program in Malawi aligned to the BRAC model that was developed in Bangladesh. This involves 5 key elements. One is comprehensive targeting of those who are extremely poor and capable also of participating in a graduation program. It involves delivering income support for consumption purposes, skills training and coaching so that people can develop income generating activities that are sustainable and appropriate in their environment. It helps people access savings and also other financial services and products so that they can grow their businesses. And it also involves an asset transfer, which is a key investment to kickstart their income generating activity. Our hypothesis is that using the graduation model and specifically targeting the people who are most aligned to social protection beneficiaries, we can support them to become resilient to shocks. Next slide, please. Next slide. Can I have the next slide, please? We may have a technical problem. I'm just waiting for the next slide. While I'm waiting for the next slide from the organizer, just to continue and say that the key question we've been asking in implementing this graduation model is whether participants in the government social cash transfer program can effectively participate also in graduation programs. We are implementing graduation programs in 2 districts in Malawi, Mangochi and Nsanje, 2 of the poorest districts in the country. The criteria for eligibility in these programs are that households must be either ultra poor or poor and have some labour so they can participate in income generation. In the first year of this program, which was 2017, we aimed to target as many social cash transfer households as possible. However, we found that we only managed to identify 109 households out of a target of 200 who are on social and are able to participate in the graduation program. And the reasons for this is that the profile of households that are on social cash transfer is typically that these households are elderly headed, and often there is no one in the household who's directly available to work. Another interesting factor is that after 3 years of being on social cash transfer, we found that many households were on a higher wealth status than their neighbours. This is somehow not surprising because of the degree of poverty in Malawi and also the fact that the social cash transfer programme has been successful in fulfilling its objectives of helping people to move on out of extreme poverty. The implication of this is that not all social cash transfer beneficiaries will be eligible to participate in graduation programmes that require them to be able to develop income generating activities. Some households on social cash will require ongoing protective and preventive support through the social protection programmes. Shock-sensitive social protection, therefore, needs to be able to respond to the increased consumption needs of these households, for example, through seasonal top-ups to the population that are not able to participate in graduation or other resilience-building programmes. Next slide, please. If I can have the next slide. While I'm waiting for the next slide, our next key question was, so what do households that can participate in graduation programs look like? What are the features of these households? We found that over 43% of households in Nsanje and over 29% of households in Mangochi are very poor, according to the community-based wealth ranking that Crescent did, while 92% of households in Nsanje and 75% in Mangochi are poor. 99% of households in Nsanje and 56% in Mangachi experience hazards. They are at risk of disaster on an annual basis. However, 65% believe that the community can solve most problems, and 47% are confident that the community can deal with unexpected events, such as sudden onset disasters. Over 90% of the households that are on our graduation program own land. However, they cannot utilize it effectively because they don't have access to inputs or extension advice. 69% of the households on the program are female-headed, illustrating the female face of poverty in rural Malawi. And almost 50% believe that men should have the final word on decisions. In female-headed households, there is usually a male in the family who is responsible for making main decisions. For example, the maternal uncle in matrilineal societies. Village savings and loans were seen by those on the graduation program as being a key coping strategy in the face of risk and disaster. And then finally, 21% of this population of poor or extreme poor households own a mobile phone. So if I can have the next slide, please. We can look at what are the implications of these findings for shock-sensitive social protection and designing shock-sensitive social protection interventions. Next slide, please. While I'm waiting for the next slide, first of all, we need to be aware that poverty in Malawi has a very flat profile, that people at community level have perceptions of poverty which are unlikely to match the formal perceptions, the formal data that we get from a unified beneficiary register or an integrated household survey. Communities, when asked to rank people comparatively in their own way, using their own criteria, will find that there are very, very fine distinctions between one household or set of households and the next. So we know from this that it will be problematic to introduce people to the idea of the proxy means test, and also the use of more sophisticated data to identify who should be brought onto what programs, because people consider almost every household in a community as being poor or extremely poor and deserving of support. On the positive side, it's important to note that we should never underestimate community capacity to prevent, mitigate, and respond to disasters. The will is there, even if there is some capacity that needs to be built. It's also important to note that in the Malawian context, people often have assets, but they're not able to use them. So we must make sure that in shock-sensitive social protection interventions, we're enabling people to access, control, and use their own assets, in particular land. We'll have noticed that mobile phone penetration is quite high, even amongst this very poor group. And that illustrates that we do have the scope to promote e-payments, possibly on a faster basis than we had thought, because mobile phone penetration is growing. Village savings and loans are a low-cost, high-impact and very popular intervention. They're also one of the 5 pillars of the social protection program in Malawi. We should support these and continue and enable them to continue. However, it's very important that we don't over-expect results from this in terms of gender equality. Women will not benefit strategically from VSNL, Village Savings and Loans. They will benefit practically and in terms of immediate needs. However, in societies in Malawi, the key decisions remain taken by men. It's very important, therefore, that we use gender analysis to inform shock-sensitive social protection to ensure that as we work, we're increasing the joint function of decision-making at household and community level. Next slide, please. So finally, what does the next generation of questions look like? As previous speakers have identified, there is a key body of work to be done in identifying how we can link early warning systems and social protection. How do we target people in the context of disaster preparedness? So the idea idea that Concern is testing is what are the potential benefits of linking hazard with the Unified Beneficiary Registry for Social Protection. The UBR in Malawi is the social registry used by the government. UPI, an Italian NGO, is working with Concern and the government and are carrying out detailed hazard mapping using drone technology and participatory GIS methodology with communities. Concern are carrying out vulnerability assessment of populations living in hazard areas using both humanitarian and UBR data collection tools. As the UBR is rolled out in 2018 and 19 to more districts in Malawi, our intention is to test how we can feed data from hazard map areas into the Unified Beneficiary Registry and how we can create identifiers on the UBR for households at risk of disaster. The potential uses of this are, number one, preventive, so that programs can be developed and designed to target social protection and resilience building programs at those households and identified as being at risk by virtue of where they live in hazard prone areas and their poverty status. And the second potential use is responsive. We are looking at and testing pre-registration of households who are at risk of disaster on Scope, which is a platform we currently use, or in the future, potentially on the Social Protection MIS platform. This has potential applications for use in vertical and horizontal expansion, where we would hope to be able to use the fact that households have been pre-identified, then tested post-sudden onset disaster, and that resources and support could be got to them faster as a result of a lot of the data that's relevant to response being already captured on an appropriate platform for that response. Thank you.
Thank you, Quiva. So our final presentation comes from Director Harry Mamrima from the Malawi Government. He'll be presenting on the challenges and opportunities of shock-sensitive social protection in Malawi. Thank you, Director.
Thank you very much, Selvi. Sorry, I had a small mishap. And my presentation, I think most of the panelists have already touched here and there. So there will be some similarities from one presentation to the other. Can we go to the first page? Second page, please. Yeah, Malawi is a country that is prone to shocks and high vulnerability to poverty, and so we have challenges in terms of food and nutrition security. I think this has already been mentioned by a number of panelists. There is a predictable seasonal patterns, so we know that in times of like now, sometimes you can face drought or even floods, and we are already experiencing some of these disasters. And so at the end of the day, we know already we are supposed to respond to humanitarian crisis that is before us. The government recognizes that social protection plays a crucial role in managing disasters differently, and it is designed to address multiple vulnerabilities and has the potential to expand before, during, and after a crisis. This is what we are doing right now, or talking to partners. No wonder the presentations by both Edward and as well as Daniela is hinting on that, including by Sevi, because this is what we want to actually bring in, sort of like a change, so that we can move in the proper direction. Next, please. Next. Yeah, shock-sensitive social protection is now part of the Malawi National Support Program 2, and this has come about from, I would say, discussions which started 1.5 years ago with all the stakeholders implementing social protection and humanitarian programs in Malawi. The MNSP places emphasis on strengthening core social protection programs to protect consumption in the first instance. We're saying first and foremost, we have to think about protecting the lives of the poor, and ensuring that they do not lose their assets, do not repeat all their assets in the household, and later on, let's move on to supporting them to build their livelihoods so that they actually become resilient. So this is how we are coming up with this new Malawi National Support Program. Can we have the next one? Next, please. The new program also dedicates a specific pillar, as I said, which is pillar number 3, shock-sensitive social protection, looking at what actually social protection can play at the various phases of the crisis, from planning, what should we be doing, how can we respond, and how can actually we deal with the resilience of these households. And some of the measures include promoting resilience to shocks in anticipation of a crisis, by promoting household coping capacity via saving mechanisms. What people was talking about, VSLs, we are saying we need to strengthen these VSLs. They are popular, they are part of social protection, and actually they are growing. Diversifying livelihoods and increasing productive capacity. What is happening is we are saying let's ensure that we implement things we have learned from other countries, also in Malawi, for example, catchment management and watershed management. Preparing for shocks through planning and coordination in advance of shocks. We are always put unawares, and this has not really helped matters. So we are saying let's prepare in advance so that we can quickly respond. Supporting households in meeting their immediate needs in response to a shock by scaling up existing social protection programs to reach a larger proportion of the population affected. My colleagues have already talked about this, that a number of studies have been undertaken in Malawi, and we'll be discussing this over a number of months so that we can actually respond quickly and better. Supporting recovery of shocks, promoting a building back better approach by ensuring that programs designed focus on developing livelihoods to shocks. This is an area which we are working on, and according to the Malawi National Support Program 2, we will be developing an implementation plan together with the stakeholders, all the different partners, NGOs and others, that maybe this is what we need to do so that we can actually impact better. Otherwise, it has been a song. We've been talking about these issues, but now we say, no, let's go on the ground and see whether we can make a difference. Next, please. Next. Yeah, now in terms of the challenges, we are saying let's get the basics right and strengthen the existing system to ensure regular and predictable payments to protect households' consumption and build an asset base as a buffer against shocks. So we are saying, well, we have programs like the social cash transfer program, the public program, but unfortunately, the cash transfer program is now reaching all the districts, which is a prize for us, and we hope by the end of this year, all the districts will be getting, 10% of the population in Malawi will be on the social cash transfer program. Again, on the public program, we are trying to mobilize resources so that we have a comprehensive public program that runs throughout the year. I know in one of the presentations there was an issue to say why it appears we are responding at the wrong time, but we want to ensure that we strengthen catchment management and watershed management so that we can better reach the poor and hence mitigate shocks. So the issues about transfer levels for both public works program and social cash transfer, they need to increase in order to support consumption smoothening and help households cope with the effects of seasonality. We know that there are times when households are hard hit due to a number of factors, and it is at that time that we can automatically increase the transfers to support these households. Coordination, synergies between humanitarian and social protection sectors still needs strengthening. So what we are saying here is there are two sorts of sectors: the social protection sector and the humanitarian response, disaster management affairs sector. So we are saying let's work together, because we know that we can, if we work together, we're going to actually quickly respond and support these households with, at a cost-effective manner, as well as efficiently. Otherwise, the current state of affairs is that it has been, I would say, because from last year things have started changing. But humanitarian would actually come to respond, and then they disappear. Then social protection comes in a very small package, and that hasn't been very helpful. But we can strengthen these synergies if we work together. Financing, adequate support from donors for improved financing mechanism. We have been proposing that we need to come up with a social support fund. We are saying the implementers of these programs are mostly the district councils and the NGOs out there. But it's difficult to implement a program in pieces. It's better, it's always good to have a program that is running throughout the year, and which is regular, which is predictable, so that even the beneficiaries themselves are assured that, well, we do get this support for this reason. And in that manner, we can actually be assured that the households can build their resilience. Limited potential of digital and flexible payment structures due to low national coverage. This is another issue which has been there in Malawi, and but we've been engaging stakeholders. We have undertaken pilots in 2 districts in terms of electronic payments to social transfer beneficiaries with the support from the European Union. And we have learned a lot of lessons. Even Irish Aid has also been supporting us in implementing a social transfer program in 1 district using this mode of payments. They may not be 100% electronic payments, but actually they are leaning towards that direction. And we intend to scale this nationwide. We do believe that it's critical if we help, if we engage the private sector, the digital, the mobile operators. Then later on, then on the other hand, they can also be improving their services and then increasing coverage. Limited ex-ante support by donors in order to prepare better for a crisis. This is an issue, and it is impacting negatively in terms of implementing both the humanitarian response and social protection. But I think the debate is growing in Malawi, and we do hope that we will be there very soon. Thank you. I think this should be my last slide. Thank you, Sir.
Thank you, Harry.
Yes, please. With regard to the social cash transfer program, we know that this is where my colleagues have already mentioned that there is a challenge in terms of including social cash transfer beneficiaries, especially if communities see this as 2 programs targeting 1 household. They don't take it, timely. So when we actually bring this program together, it is feasible for the social cash transfer to be adapted to deliver timely support in response to crises and shocks at the same time. So, and this is due to the trial of vetting exposure which everybody referred to. With regard to the school meals program, there's the issue of horizontal expansion for 6 months of school meals program through across, I think this has been done in 71 schools across the hardest hit districts, aimed at continuing learning and reducing negative coping strategies. What we are seeing here is we need to to ensure that school meals program is also properly designed or modified so that it can really impact positively. And one of the thinking is that maybe we need to incorporate a component of public program in undertaking a homegrown school meals program. Yes, please. Next. I think there was a public program shift to, before this slide, I think there was a public program shift to watershed management in the national public program, including rainwater harvesting, reforestation, soil conservation, with the aim of increasing water table during drought periods and reducing the impact of the crisis. Productive asset creation and integrated risk management strategies that help build resilience levels, forming the foundation for climate-sensitive graduation pathway. Because we are saying we need to sort of like recharge our water tables. They are too low, and in so doing, we'll be able to ensure our households have got a foundation to actually build their assets. And the role of public works in the construction, the building infrastructure in areas hit by crisis. Public program will still remain an important tool in terms of supporting communities actually achieve most of their development needs. The slide which is on which we can all see, livelihoods and adaptive programs promote shift from short-term humanitarian response to long-term resilience programs with crisis modifiers. We are saying this is the direction that we should be taking. Otherwise, we can better support the communities if we work with long-term resilience programs. Build skills and assets for resilience among key populations. I think this has been talked much by PIVA, and we are actually together in this, and we are also trying to come up with a nationally agreed graduation pathways. But we do really support the efforts that Council Malawi is doing in that area, and we hope most of the partners will also be learning from that. Integrate disaster risk reduction with social support programs. I think this is a discussion that already commenced with even our colleagues from the other Department of Disaster Management Affairs. Would want them and us to work together in order to reach the affected communities in a better way. Promote village savings and loans as a tool to mitigate and respond to risk. I think this has been talked much already. Can we move to the next? We do have we have developed what you are referring to as unified beneficiary registry, a social registry that captures socioeconomic data on poor households for the purposes of targeting. I'm glad to inform the audience there that we have a number of development partners coming together to support us in this. At first, it wasn't easy, but here we are. It's now working. I'm actually sitting in the office of the UPR in Lilongwe, and we have now targeted. We have registered the households in 10 districts over the last, I would say, how many? For 4 months or so, and that is 50% of the population has been captured in this UPR. Testing its appropriateness in the last humanitarian response revealed that there was potential to use it again, but more work needed to be done on systems alignment and further strengthening. What we mean here is would want implementers of humanitarian response to directly use this data to enable them identify beneficiary households for the humanitarian work. And in one district, we have covered 100% support from WF, from FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization. But the desire is that maybe we go nationwide, and then cover all households, 100% coverage, which would be very handy. I mean, for implementers of not only social protection programs, but even programs outside social protection. Next, please. With regard to area warning, we're saying identifying triggers for area warning, crisis modifier funding to put preventive measures in place before the crisis. This has to be done because I know it's something that we've been talking about for a number of years, but we need to have this contingent funding to react quickly to a crisis. So the issue about contingent financing we've been discussing. Fortunately, it's an issue that is also being talked about by our colleagues from the humanitarian sector. So it's something that we'll pursue together with the idea of social support fund. Electronic payments, we are saying e-payments provide the potential. Sorry, there was something passing by outside. Electronic payments provide the potential to vary the size and frequency of transfers according to the changing needs. That's versatile in both development and humanitarian settings. So we are pursuing this issue of electronic payments, and we do hope by next year end, I think all this should be providing households electronic, I mean, cash transfers electronically. This has got the potential in reducing a number of risks and also ensuring that the speedy delivery of the transfers to beneficiary households. Smart cards, local bank expansion, digital registration, and advanced technical capacity at local level are also taking place, starting to enable communities economies of scale. What is happening is we are working with a number of stakeholders, and this is the direction that we are going. So we do believe that a digital e-payment will be growing very fast in Malawi. Next, please. This is my last slide. And Malawi has commenced the journey for building a strong shock-sensitive social protection. This is for sure because I think from last 1.5 years ago, we've started to work together, and I think you will be going in the same direction. And the pilot so far revealed good practices, a number of pilots that have taken place. So we seem to agree in most of the issues. Lessons learned and guidance on future work. My colleagues from UNICEF, WFP, Bolsonaro, and Joseph, I think have already elaborated in their presentation. So I thank you for your attention. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Harry. So with the time we have left, we'll try and tackle some of the questions that you've put to us. I'm not sure if we'll get through all of them, but we'll go get to as many as we can. So the first question comes from Richmond, which is, why is social protection failing to reduce poverty to those affected by poverty? How do you improve resilience when social protection fails to address poverty? So I'll ask Rebecca to answer that, please. Okay, perhaps we can't seem to get a hold of Rebecca. I might ask Quiver to answer that question.
I'm sorry, I lost sound for a minute. The question I'm answering is, why is social protection failing to reduce poverty? Is that correct?
that's correct. And how do you improve resilience when social protection fails to address poverty?
So this is a very pertinent question, very relevant to the experience in Malawi. Maybe first of all, just to say that it wouldn't be entirely accurate in Malawi to say that social protection is failing to reduce poverty. For example, the social cash transfer program fulfilled many of its objectives. However, the objectives are primarily around protecting people. The new Malawi National Social Support Program focuses much more on enabling people to graduate out of poverty by improving their resilience and also their ability to withstand shocks. So, and it is for the very reason that we need to ensure that people are not constantly remaining in a situation where they require protective assistance and are also vulnerable to the recurrent humanitarian crises that happen in Malawi. So how do we do it? In the Malawi National Social Support Program, Pillar 2 focuses on resilience. And what this means is not that the social protection system on its own is going to deliver resilience building programs. However, it speaks to the need for very strong coordination and collaboration between those actors who are involved in social protection and those who are involved in investing in and contributing to resilience building in Malawi. So as the director, Harry Lima has just said, the policy promotes a shift from short-term management that have crisis modifiers embedded within them. This is the model that we're now implementing as of this year in Malawi with support from the major donors. And this is something that we hope to be able to develop further and align it with social protection. And part of that is ensuring that we are aware of where are the populations who are most at risk of disaster. So as I mentioned, those populations living in hazard-prone areas, what are the factors that drive their poverty? So are they life stage factors? Is it vulnerability due to lack of assets or control over assets, or other factors? And how can we best support them? So fundamentally, it's about ensuring that social protection interventions are very well aligned with the design and implementation of resilience interventions by all actors in the field, and ensuring that the divides between those involved in social protection and resilience and humanitarian are steadily broken down. And we have seen a lot of progress on that in Malawi over the last few years.
The second question from Anita is, what do you mean by vertical expansion, increasing the amount of cash transfer? And also, does horizontal expansion mean increasing the population coverage? So I'll ask Edward from UNICEF to answer that, please.
Okay, thanks, thanks, Selby. So vertical expansion is increasing the value of the transfer for existing social protection beneficiaries, and we're increasing it in this case by the value of the humanitarian response transfer. So there's in the piggybacking example from 2016-17, the same value was used as the humanitarian transfer, and this was a recognition that the social protection program and the humanitarian program have different objectives. Social protection program is trying to address chronic poverty, and as Quiva said, it's doing a very good job across many of its objectives, whereas the humanitarian program is addressing acute poverty and acute needs. So the vertical expansion is an increase in the value of the social, an increase in the value of the transfer received by social cash transfer program beneficiaries. In horizontal expansion, what we'll be looking at in the feasibility study during this year is an increase in the beneficiaries to the program, or a temporary enrolment, for instance, of beneficiaries in the social cash transfer program. The three terms I use, piggybacking, vertical expansion, and horizontal expansion, I'm using really as defined and set out in the Oxford Policy Management papers and literature review that was done over the last year or two. That's generally the way that we're using it here in Malawi. Thanks, Selby.
Thanks, Edward. Next question is, will a shock responsive system use the Unified Beneficiary Registry. And I'll ask Daniela to speak to that, please.
Hi, thank you for that. I'll definitely come in on this one and then allow other colleagues who also spoke about the use of the UBR to complement as needed. I think definitely the point of departure of the UBR is to populate it with those that are going to be within the social protection system. That's in priority as the point of departure, but also as Harry, the director, noted, there's the example of Palombe, where we have been able to move away from perhaps having only the 50% who are deemed most vulnerable and poor on the registry, and this has been expanded to 100% of the population. The advantage that has been identified of being able to have 100% of the population under the UBR is that it would allow an easier identification of households that can be reached through social protection should a shock occur. Because we understand that in the case of large-scale shocks, floods or droughts, that it's not going to be only 50% of the population in any given district that will be affected. This threshold could be exceeded, and we could be looking at other percentages of the population. So in that context, 100% of the UBR could be of use. But there have also been discussions about how do we make this
Okay, I think we've lost Daniela momentarily. We might just move on to the next question and see if she comes back to answer more. So the next question is, given the dependency of the humanitarian response on both financial and technical support from donors, can you elaborate on the leadership role of the government and where you feel this can and should be strengthened? So this is a good question for our director, Harry Mwamlima. So I will ask Harry to take this. Thank you. It seems that we're having problems with Harry's audio as well. I think we will try and tackle a question about the use of the term shock-sensitive social protection. The question asked is that similar to shock-responsive social protection, or are they different? So I'll ask Rebecca if she could answer that.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I think of note is that shock responsive social protection has largely, not exclusively, but largely been looking at how social protection can respond in the aftermath of shocks and emergencies. And it was an explicit attention in the study in Malawi, given discussions that were going on, to think about shock-sensitive social protection, to think about it more in terms of the cycle of disaster risk management and in response. So explicitly thinking about what can be done to prepare for in advance of shocks, as well as response. And so thinking a bit more widely and across the whole spectrum of shocks, and how social protection can be used at various stages, but also how thinking in terms of program design, implementation, but also planning and preparing for shocks can be taken within that whole cycle of understanding shocks. Thanks, Elvie.
Success of this new approach and compare it to the results of the separate humanitarian response. Secondly, we'll need to pay attention to any adverse impacts of shock-sensitive social protection to ensure that a household is not worse off with a social protection response than with an emergency response. Thirdly, if our program aims to fulfil both development and emergency functions, there'll need to be closer cooperation between social protection and humanitarian actors. And we also may need to reconcile of reducing chronic vulnerability with the imperative of lives. With this in mind, we will continue to build this by to test dependence, financing, and the use of social risk for emergency response. So watch this space. To
Hi everyone. I'm sorry that we seem to have had some technical problems, but thank you very much for all of your questions, and yeah, thank you everybody for participating, and thank you everybody for the panelists as well, and we're very sorry about the technical problems that we had.
No, thank you very much. It's unfortunate that we had this, but I think it has been very good. We hope the attendees have actually taken something from Malawi, and that we can continue discussing the issues around the social protection for Malawi in the near future. Thank you very much.
And finally, just before we leave, we'll just let you know that the questions will be accessible on the socialprotection.org website in due course. Thank you very much, everybody.